Play.
Hello, fellow travelers, Alice began, her voice a low hum that resonated through the cavernous space. My name is Alice, though in the astral realm, I am known by many other aliases. You see, my heritage is a peculiar blend, fae and demigod. This unique lineage grants me the ability to house several entities within my own body. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled travelers. Some shifted nervously, eyes darting towards Alice with a mixture of curiosity and fear. On Earth, Alice continued, ignoring their reactions, this ability is considered problematic. They call it dissociative identity disorder. A rather clinical term for a reality that extends far beyond the confines of this mortal plane. She paused, a chilling memory surfacing. My human mother, she tried to silence the voices within. She believed them to be demons. A tragic misunderstanding, to say the least. Alice shuddered, the memory of the cold steel of the gun, the deafening roar of the gunshot, and the agonizing pain that followed, briefly overwhelming her. But I digress, she said, regaining her composure. We will delve into that particular experiment in human existence in due time. For now, I am here to speak of my life before I got here. The life that my mortal enemy, Elliot, has worked tirelessly to erase from my memory. A low growl rumbled from the back of the cavern. Elliot? A gruff voice boomed. That treacherous, whatever he is. What has he done? Alice turned to see a burly dwarf with a fiery beard glaring at her. He has stolen my past, traveler, she replied, her voice hardening. And with it, my brother. Charles. The dwarf's eyes widened. Charles? The one with the mischievous glint in his eyes and the laughter that could shake the very foundations of the earth? Alice smiled faintly. The very same. Elliot, in his insatiable hunger for power, has imprisoned him within a dream, a nightmare from which he may never awaken. By the beard of Gorin. The dwarf exclaimed. This is an outrage. We must find him, Alice. We must free him from Elliot's clutches. Alice nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. That is precisely why I am here. To find my brother and reclaim my past. To ensure that Elliot never again threatens the fragile peace between our realms. Charles and I played with fae and god children alike, though we spent most of our time in the fae realm. The whispers of the wind, the laughter of the sprites, the shimmering dance of the moonlight through the leaves, these were our classrooms. We learned the language of the trees, the secrets of the stars, and the magic that pulsed through every living thing. But our education wasn't confined to the whims of the fae. Our father, ever mindful of his divine duties, insisted we also learn the ways of the gods. And so, we were sent to Heaven's Palace, a gleaming edifice of marble and gold, to be schooled in the arts of diplomacy, the intricacies of celestial law, and the proper etiquette for addressing a pantheon of deities. It wasn't our favorite place. Why learn to read and write? Charles would often complain to father, when we could be learning to summon a whirlwind or talk to the animals. I'd usually nod in agreement. The lessons on proper posture and the importance of never interrupting a deity while they were meditating were excruciatingly boring. One particularly memorable incident involved a celestial tea party. We were supposed to be charming and witty, engaging in polite conversation with the assembled goddesses. Instead, Charles, ever the mischievous one, decided to entertain our esteemed guests with a rendition of the farting badger song, a rather earthy tune he'd learned from a mischievous imp in the Whispering Woods. The ensuing chaos was legendary. Teacups shattered, goddesses shrieked, and the headmistress, a stern-faced deity named Athena, nearly exploded with indignation. Father received a rather urgent summons. He arrived at the palace looking grim, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a thunderous frown. Charles, he began, his voice booming through the grand hall, I trust you have a satisfactory explanation for this incident? Charles, ever the charmer, grinned impishly. Father, you wouldn't believe the faces they made. Athena, who was still sputtering with indignation, interrupted. Your son, Yal, has brought dishonor upon this esteemed institution. He has disrupted the peace, offended the goddesses, and potentially traumatized a fledgling cherub. Father, to Athena's astonishment, chuckled. Indeed, it seems he has. However, I believe a healthy dose of mischief is a vital part of a balanced education. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe my son has a rather important lesson to learn. And with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, Father grabbed Charles by the ear and dragged him out of the hall, leaving the assembled deities speechless. We never did learn to properly curtsy, and our attempts at celestial diplomacy often bordered on the chaotic. But we learned something far more valuable: the importance of embracing our unique blend of Fae and God, and never, ever, taking ourselves too seriously. It was during those tumultuous years at Heaven's Palace that Alice met Cardi. He arrived a year before them, a solitary figure with long, flowing white hair that shimmered like moonlight on snow. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a depth that intrigued Alice. He was unlike any other student, aloof, enigmatic, and possessing a grace that belied his immense strength. Rumors swirled around him, whispers of a hidden lineage, of a past shrouded in mystery. Cardi never spoke of his family, only hinting at a life lived in the shadows, a life far removed from the celestial courts. Alice, captivated by his enigmatic aura, found herself drawn to him. She would often linger near the gardens where he practiced archery, her green hair a vibrant contrast to the stark white of his. Cardi, though reserved, would always acknowledge her presence with a slow, appreciative smile, his gaze lingering a moment too long on her face. Charles, ever the observant twin, noticed Alice's growing fascination with the mysterious centaur. A pang of jealousy, unexpected and sharp, pierced through him. He had always been the more outgoing twin, the one who charmed and entertained. Yet, when it came to Cardi, Alice seemed to have a magnetic pull. Determined not to be outdone, Charles began his own campaign to capture Cardi's attention. He would regale Cardi with tales of their childhood adventures in the Fey realm, his laughter echoing through the halls. He would challenge Cardi to playful sparring matches, his movements a blur of green and brown. Cardi, however, seemed to remain indifferent to Charles's charms. His attention was always drawn back to Alice, whether it was a gentle teasing remark during a philosophy lesson or a lingering gaze across the crowded dining hall. One evening, during a stargazing session on the palace balcony, Cardi turned to Alice, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "Your hair," he murmured, "it reminds me of the northern lights, a breathtaking display of celestial magic." Alice, her cheeks flushed, stammered, "Thank you, Cardi. Yours is like moonlight on snow, ethereal and beautiful." Cardi smiled, a slow, captivating curve of his lips. "And you," he said, his gaze intense, "you are a whirlwind, a force of nature. Unpredictable, captivating, and utterly impossible to ignore." Alice's heart leaped. Was that flirtation? Charles, who had been observing them from a distance, felt a surge of frustration. He resolved to up his game. The competition for Cardi's attention had officially begun. Fate Ball was a game of terrifying grace. Played atop impossibly tall, swaying stilts, the objective was to capture the opposing team's flag while navigating a treacherous obstacle course. Razor-sharp wind chimes hung from the ceiling, threatening to slice through flesh. The ground was littered with electrified traps that would jolt you senseless. And the players themselves? A whirlwind of limbs and weapons, their stilts clattering against the polished marble floor. Charles, ever the daredevil, thrived in the chaos. He was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of green and brown, his laughter echoing through the hall as he dodged a particularly vicious trap. Cardi, however, was a different beast altogether. His movements were fluid and controlled, his eyes assessing the situation with a predatory gleam. He moved with the grace of a panther, his stilts seeming to defy gravity as he navigated the treacherous course. Through these shared experiences, a deep friendship blossomed between Charles and Cardi. They spent hours discussing philosophy, debating the merits of different fighting styles, and sharing their dreams for the future. Cardi, wary of revealing too much, would often deflect Charles's inquiries about his past with a cryptic smile. But gradually, he began to open up, confiding in Charles about the burden of his heritage. "My family," Cardi confessed one evening, his voice somber, "they are different. They are warriors, bound by an ancient oath to reshape the universe." Charles, startled, frowned. "Reshape the universe? How?" Cardi hesitated, then looked away. "They believe the current order is flawed, that the gods are complacent, that the Fae are too chaotic. They believe they are the ones to bring true order to the cosmos." Charles felt a chill creep down his spine. But you don't agree with them? Cardi shook his head. I don't know. I was raised to believe in their cause, to embrace my destiny as a warrior. But deep down, I question their methods. I question their ultimate goal. Charles, sensing Cardi's inner turmoil, put a comforting hand on his shoulder. You don't have to follow in their footsteps, Cardi. You have your own path to forge. Cardi looked at him, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Perhaps you're right. As they grew older, their friendship deepened. Alice, initially jealous of their burgeoning bond, found herself drawn into their orbit. The three of them became inseparable, their laughter echoing through the halls of the palace. They even formed a band, a unique blend of celestial and earthly sounds. Charles, with his powerful vocals and infectious energy, was the frontman. Alice, with her ethereal voice and masterful violin playing, added a touch of ethereal beauty. And Cardi, surprisingly, proved to be a talented saxophonist, his music a soulful counterpoint to the other two. When they were upperclassmen, they began their clandestine escapades to Earth, disguised as ordinary mortals. They played impromptu concerts in dimly lit clubs, their music a fusion of blues, jazz, and celestial harmonies. They captivated audiences with their raw talent and undeniable charisma. Alice, with her flowing green hair and mesmerizing violin playing, became the enigmatic muse. Charles, with his charismatic stage presence, ignited the crowd. And Cardi, hidden in the shadows, his saxophone weaving a hypnotic spell, added an air of mystery to their performances. Their popularity soared. They were the talk of the underground music scene, their concerts legendary. But their fame came with a price. Elliot, ever vigilant, began to take notice. He sensed a threat in their growing influence, a challenge to the established order. He began to weave subtle whispers into the dreams of their audiences, sowing seeds of doubt, stirring up fear. The trio, oblivious to the danger that lurked beneath the surface, continued to play, their music a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in shadows. But as their fame grew, so did the stakes. And soon, they would learn that their music was more than just entertainment, it was a rebellion, a defiance against the forces that sought to control their destinies. One night, deep in the heart of a smoky jazz club, Charles turned to Alice, his face etched with a grim determination. I can't stay here anymore, Alice, he confessed, his voice low and urgent. Not here, not in this gilded cage. Alice, startled, frowned. What are you talking about, Charles? We're happy here. We have our music, our friends. That's the problem, Alice, Charles interrupted, his eyes filled with a newfound intensity. We're living a lie. We're playing pretend. We're supposed to be learning from Elliot, preparing for our roles in the celestial hierarchy. But all I see is stagnation. Injustice. Alice felt a chill creep down her spine. What are you talking about? I've been spending time on Earth, Alice, he admitted, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Real time, not just playing music. I've seen the suffering, the poverty, the despair. And it's unbearable. Alice's eyes widened. Charles, you can't just disappear. You're a prince, a god. You have responsibilities. Responsibilities to whom? Charles retorted, his voice rising. To a system that cares more about power and prestige than the well-being of its own creations? I can't stand by and watch while innocent beings suffer. Charles had been changing. He had become more human. He had started advocating for the homeless, using his influence to help those in need. He had even dabbled in local politics, challenging the corrupt officials who exploited the poor. These actions, however, were a direct affront to the divine order, a rebellion against the very fabric of their existence. Cardi, who had been observing their argument with growing concern, intervened. Charles, you can't simply abandon your duties. Your family, your heritage. My heritage is a burden, Cardi, Charles declared, his voice thick with emotion. It's a chain that binds me to a system I no longer believe in. I need to find my own path, to live a life of meaning, to make a difference. Cardi reached out to him, his voice gentle. But what if you're walking into a trap, Charles? What if Elliot is manipulating you, using your compassion against you? Charles looked at him, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. I can't deny that thought has crossed my mind. I've been feeling watched, followed. He pulled a small, intricately carved wooden figurine from his pocket. I found this in my room a few days ago. It's strange. Cardi examined the figurine closely. It's a powerful enchantment, designed to drain your energy, to weaken your resolve. The realization struck them both simultaneously. Elliot was playing a dangerous game. He was using Charles as a pawn, manipulating his compassion for his own nefarious purposes. Their argument was cut short by a sudden commotion. The door to the bar burst open, revealing a group of imposing figures, tall, muscular men with cold, calculating eyes. They moved with a predatory grace, their movements eerily coordinated. By order of the Divine Council, one of them declared, his voice a chilling monotone, "You are under arrest." The battle. The ensuing chaos was deafening. The bar erupted into a whirlwind of flying bodies, shattered glass, and the roar of panicked screams. The guards, skilled in the arts of combat, quickly subdued the patrons, their movements swift and efficient. Alice, her eyes blazing with fury, drew her violin, the wood shimmering with an eerie green light. She unleashed a torrent of sonic waves, the music a weapon of pure energy, knocking back the guards with invisible force. Cardi, his eyes narrowed, unleashed a barrage of arrows, each one imbued with the power of 1,000 storms. But the guards were prepared. They deflected Alice's attacks with shimmering shields, and Cardi's arrows were intercepted by a barrage of energy blasts. The fight raged on, the bar transforming into a battleground, the air thick with the smell of ozone and fear. Suddenly, one of the guards, a hulking brute with a face like granite, lunged at Alice. He struck her with a vicious blow, sending her crashing to the ground. Alice cried out in pain, her lips split open, blood trickling down her chin. Charles, witnessing the attack on his sister, erupted in a blinding rage. Purple lightning, raw and untamed, erupted from his hands, incinerating the guard in a searing flash of light. The bar fell silent, a hush descending upon the stunned patrons. Charles, his eyes wide with terror, stared at his hands, his breath catching in his throat. He had unleashed his divine power on earth, a grave transgression that could have dire consequences. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped him. He knew he had to disappear, to vanish before the full extent of his actions could be discovered. Without another word, he turned and fled into the night, leaving Alice and Cardi staring after him in disbelief. Alice, despite her injuries, tried to stop him, but it was too late. Charles had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of chaos and unanswered questions. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. There was no sign of Charles. He had simply disappeared, as if swallowed by the very earth he had sought to protect. Alice and Cardi, haunted by the events of that fateful night, pretended that nothing had happened. They continued their duties at the palace, their smiles a carefully constructed facade, their hearts heavy with the weight of their unspoken grief and fear. But the truth, like a venomous serpent, coiled within the heart of the palace. Charles, the rebellious prince, the champion of the downtrodden, had become a fugitive, a ghost haunting the edges of their memories. And Elliot, watching from the shadows, savored the chaos he had unleashed. Elliot, with his fair skin and eyes the color of sapphires, found himself strangely drawn to Alice. Watching her navigate the complexities of celestial bureaucracy with a blend of grace and quiet defiance, he felt a stirring in his soul he hadn't experienced in centuries. He began to find excuses to have her come to his office, ostensibly to discuss matters of state, but in reality, to simply bask in her presence. He would offer her rare teas, regale her with tales of his travels across the cosmos, and subtly compliment her intelligence and wit. He promoted her to his personal assistant, ensuring she was by his side at all times. Alice, initially hesitant, found herself drawn to Elliot's charm. He treated her with a deference bordering on worship, showering her with gifts and compliments. He would arrange lavish dinners, serenade her with ancient celestial songs, and whisper sweet nothings in her ear, his voice a silken caress. Alice, naive to the complexities of divine courtship, found herself slowly succumbing to his charm. He was so different from the boisterous, impulsive Charles, and so much more mature. Elliot seemed to understand her, to appreciate her intellect, to see beyond the vibrant green hair and the mischievous glint in her eyes. She began to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, Elliot was a good man, a benevolent god who truly cared for her. Finally, he asked her on a date. "I have a place I'd like to show you," he said, his voice a low, seductive murmur. A hidden paradise, a star system untouched by time. Alice, her heart fluttering, eagerly accepted. Elliot took her to a breathtaking nebula, a swirling vortex of colors that shifted and shimmered like 1,000 dreams. He had arranged a private picnic on a nearby moon, a feast of celestial delicacies and rare wines. As they dined under the starry canopy, Elliot gazed at Alice, his eyes filled with a longing that both captivated and terrified her. "You are more beautiful than any star I have ever seen," he breathed, reaching out to gently touch a strand of her green hair. Alice, mesmerized by his gaze, leaned into his touch. She felt a strange pull towards him, a yearning she couldn't quite explain. Meanwhile, Cardi, his search for Charles leading him across the cosmos, arrived at the palace of his older brother, Ganesha. He sought Ganesha's wisdom, hoping to find a clue, any clue, to Charles's whereabouts. As he waited in the opulent antechamber, he heard music drifting from the grand ballroom. Curiosity piqued, he wandered towards the sound. And then he saw her. Alice. Dressed in a flowing gown of shimmering silver, she was dancing with Elliot, her head resting on his shoulder. They moved with a graceful fluidity, their bodies entwined in a slow, sensuous dance. Cardi watched, his heart clenching in his chest. He had never felt this way before, a mixture of jealousy, anger, and a strange, unfamiliar longing. He didn't intend to intrude, but something within him compelled him to act. He moved silently through the crowd, his gaze fixed on Alice. Reaching her, he gently placed his hand over her mouth, silencing her startled gasp. "Cardi?" she whispered, her eyes wide with surprise. He pulled her into the shadows, his touch burning through her. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and intense. Alice, still reeling from the unexpected encounter, stammered, I was invited. By Elliot." "Elliot?" Cardi scoffed, his anger rising. "Why?" Alice, feeling a surge of defiance, retorted, "It's none of your business, Cardi." Cardi, taken aback by her sharp tone, felt a surge of unexpected emotions. He wanted to shake her, to make her understand the danger she was in. But something else, something primal and uncontrollable, took over. He pulled her close, his lips meeting hers in a fierce, passionate kiss. Alice, startled, gasped, her body trembling beneath his touch. It was her first kiss, a whirlwind of sensation that left her breathless. Cardi, lost in the intensity of the moment, clung to her, his senses reeling. But then, as quickly as it had begun, he pulled away, his face pale. I apologize," he stammered, his voice rough with emotion. "I shouldn't have. He turned and walked away, leaving Alice standing alone in the shadows, her mind reeling. She had never expected this, never imagined that Cardi, walking away, felt a wave of self-loathing wash over him. He had crossed a line, betrayed the trust of his friends. He had kissed Alice, not out of love, but out of jealousy, out of a desperate need to assert his claim on her, even if it meant hurting her. He had to find Charles. He had to warn Alice. And he had to learn to control his emotions, to master the turmoil that had consumed him. A year had passed since Charles's disappearance, a year filled with agonizing uncertainty for Alice. Despite Elliot's constant attention, his lavish gifts, and his attempts to fill her life with distractions, a gnawing emptiness remained within her. Every day, she searched for clues, scouring every corner of the known universe for any trace of her brother. Cardi, meanwhile, had become a shadow, his presence a constant reminder of the night he had kissed her. The look in his eyes, a potent mix of raw love, lust, and a simmering anger, both terrified and intrigued her. She found herself constantly analyzing his every move, his every word, trying to decipher the emotions swirling beneath his guarded demeanor. Elliot, noticing the growing tension between Cardi and Alice, made a calculated move. He promoted Cardi to the head of his personal guard, a position of immense power and influence. This, Elliot believed, would serve two purposes. It would keep Cardi close, allowing him to observe his every move, and it would give Cardi a taste of power, a taste he hoped would ultimately bind him to Elliot's service. However, Elliot had underestimated Cardi. Cardi's family, a secret order of warrior gods, had been patiently waiting for an opportunity to gain influence within the celestial hierarchy. This new position, with its access to sensitive information and the ability to move freely within the highest levels of power, was the perfect opening. Meanwhile, Alice's life was slowly unraveling. Elliot, growing increasingly impatient with her lingering doubts, resorted to more drastic measures. He hired a group of rogue mercenaries to stage a break-in at her apartment, a calculated act of intimidation designed to make her feel vulnerable and dependent on him. As the mercenaries stormed her apartment, Alice, armed with only her wits and a rusty dagger she kept hidden beneath her pillow, fought back with a ferocity that surprised even herself. But she was outnumbered, outmatched. Just as the mercenaries were about to overpower her, Elliot burst through the door, a whirlwind of motion. He dispatched the mercenaries with a swiftness that chilled Alice to the bone. "Alice!" he cried, scooping her into his arms, his face contorted with worry. He carried her to the sofa, his touch gentle yet firm. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" Alice, shaken but unharmed, could only nod, her eyes wide with shock. Elliot, his eyes blazing with a protective fury, pulled her close, his lips meeting hers in a passionate, desperate kiss. He tasted blood on her lip, a stark reminder of the danger she had faced. He deepened the kiss, his hands roaming her body, his touch a whirlwind of emotions, concern, possessiveness, and a burgeoning desire that terrified him. He lifted her leg around his waist, his mind consumed by a primal urge, a desire to possess her completely. But then, the door burst open again, interrupting the moment. It was Y'all, his face thunderous, his eyes blazing with fury. "Elliot," Y'all roared, his voice booming through the apartment, "what in the heavens do you think you are doing?" Elliot, startled, pulled away from Alice, his face pale. "Y'all." Y'all, ignoring Elliot, rushed to his daughter's side, his gaze sweeping over her body, searching for injuries. "Alice, are you all right? Are you hurt?" Alice, still reeling from the intensity of Elliot's kiss, could only nod, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Alice, still reeling from the intensity of Elliot's kiss, could only nod, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "This is unacceptable, Elliot," Y'all declared, his voice dripping with icy disdain. "You will not touch my daughter again. You will not use your position to manipulate her affections." Elliot, his face a mask of feigned contrition, bowed his head. I apologize, Y'all. I was concerned for her safety." Y'all, unconvinced, decided to spend the night with his daughter, a silent guardian against any further attempts by Elliot to harm her. As Y'all settled into a nearby armchair, Elliot, his face a mask of fury, retreated to his private chambers. His plans for Alice were temporarily derailed, but his ambition remained undiminished. He would have Alice, he vowed. He would have her power, her love, and ultimately, the entire cosmos. He began to orchestrate his next move, a series of carefully orchestrated events designed to weaken the celestial hierarchy, to sow discord among the gods, and to pave the way for his own ascension. He would become the one true God, a being of unparalleled power, worshipped by all. And Alice, his beautiful, defiant Alice, would be his queen, his prized possession, a symbol of his absolute power. Cardi, utilizing his position as head of Elliot's guard and his own extensive network of spies, dedicated himself to finding Charles. He scoured the cosmos, his search leading him to the most unexpected corners of the universe. Time on Earth, he discovered, flowed at a much faster pace than in the celestial realms. Finally, a break came. His spies located a charismatic blues singer performing in a small, smoky club in the heart of New Orleans. The singer, an elderly man with a shock of silver hair, possessed an uncanny charisma and a voice that seemed to weave magic into the very air. Cardi, disguised as a human musician, sought out the singer. The moment he saw the man's eyes, a deep sense of recognition washed over him. It was Charles, undeniably Charles, though aged and weathered, his features softened by a lifetime of human experience. Charles, upon seeing Cardi, was stunned. "Cardi?" he exclaimed, his voice hoarse. "How?" Cardi, his emotions a whirlwind, embraced his friend. "I found you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Charles, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint, recounted his incredible tale. He remembered the attack, the blinding light, the agonizing pain. Then, nothing. And then, he was born, a human child, to a loving human family. He described growing up, his childhood a blur of forgotten memories, a nagging sense of something missing. "There was a spell," Charles explained, his voice trembling. "A spell Mother taught me, a last-ditch effort to save me. It protected me from Elliot, from death itself. But the side effects, they were drastic. I became fully human. My divine essence, it faded." Charles, now an old man, revealed that he was nearing the end of his human life. "But there's something else, Cardi," he said, his gaze fixed on his friend. "Something extraordinary." He took a deep breath, his voice filled with a strange sense of peace. "Alice, she's going to be born again. With me." Cardi was speechless. "Born again? With you?" Charles smiled, a faint echo of his old mischievous grin. "Yes. It seems the spell, it had an unexpected side effect. It bound our souls, Alice and mine. We'll be born together, as human siblings, once more." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. I always wanted to do this," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. And then, he kissed Cardi, a gentle, lingering kiss that spoke volumes of unspoken emotions. It was a kiss of farewell, a kiss of love, a kiss that echoed through eternity. Cardi, his heart aching with a grief he had never known, held Charles close, his tears falling silently. He knew he had to honor his friend's final request. He carefully placed Charles's body within a magical bag, a tear-shaped talisman that would preserve his essence until the time of his rebirth. Returning to the palace, Cardi found it surrounded by Elliot's guards. The palace had been placed on lockdown. He was unable to enter, his attempts to gain entry met with fierce resistance. Desperation gripping him, Cardi looked to the heavens. And then he saw him, Yal, his face grim, perched atop a majestic oak tree. Yal, sensing his son's distress, flew down, landing gracefully beside him. "Cardi," he said, his voice grave, "it's too late." Cardi, his voice thick with emotion, demanded to know what had happened. Yal shook his head. "Alice," she confronted Elliot. A battle ensued, a battle of epic proportions. Cardi's blood ran cold. "Alice. She unleashed her power," Yal continued, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "A torrent of purple fey fire, a fury I have never witnessed before. It was breathtaking, terrifying." Yal described the scene, the palace shimmering with chaotic energy, the air crackling with the raw power of the clash between two titans. Elliot, his sapphire eyes blazing with a malevolent light, unleashed his own devastating magic, the palace trembling under the force of their combined power. The battle raged for hours, the very fabric of reality threatened to tear apart. Finally, exhausted, wounded, Alice, her strength waning, was forced to retreat. "She's safe, for now," Yal assured him, "but Elliot, he is stronger than we anticipated." Yal, sensing Cardi's despair, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Come, son, he said, his voice filled with a strange sense of resignation. We must prepare. With the flick of his wrist, Yal teleported them both back to his secluded Fey castle, a place of refuge, a place to regroup, a place to plan their next move. The war had begun, and the fate of the cosmos hung precariously in the balance. Alice and Charles were born into a world of squalor and despair. Their mother, Christine, a crack addict ravaged by years of abuse, barely registered their existence. Their father, Leon, a hulking figure fueled by rage and cheap whiskey, saw them as nothing more than burdens. Their childhood was a brutal tapestry of neglect and abuse. The stench of cheap liquor and burnt food permeated their tiny apartment in the dilapidated projects of Memphis. The screams of their mother, the thundering blows of their father's fists, the chilling silence that followed, these were the sounds that filled their young lives. Alice, the more sensitive of the two, bore the brunt of their father's rage. His abuse, both physical and emotional, was insidious and pervasive. The touch of his hands, meant to comfort, instead brought only pain and fear. She learned to shrink into herself, to become invisible, to disappear into the shadows. Charles, in contrast, developed a thick shell of defiance. He became a street kid, tough and resourceful, surviving on his wits and his fists. He fell in with the wrong crowd, drawn into the world of drugs and violence. He became a dealer, a small-time player in the city's underworld, his life a constant struggle for survival. Despite their vastly different paths, both Alice and Charles carried within them echoes of their past lives, fleeting glimpses of forgotten worlds, whispers of magic that seemed to shimmer just beyond their grasp. Alice would sometimes find herself drawn to celestial objects, the moon in particular, a strange longing stirring within her. Charles, despite his hardened exterior, would occasionally experience moments of inexplicable calm, a sense of peace that seemed to emanate from nowhere. These moments were fleeting, quickly dismissed as delusions or the lingering effects of their traumatic childhoods. Alice, despite her troubled past, managed to escape the clutches of her family. She joined the Navy, seeking escape and a sense of purpose. However, the rigid structure of military life proved to be too much for her. The trauma of her childhood resurfaced, manifesting in self-destructive behavior. She began to self-medicate, her addiction spiraling out of control. Discharged from the Navy with a dishonorable discharge and a diagnosis of PTSD and dissociative identity disorder, Alice's life began to unravel. She married a man who, like her, was grappling with his own demons. Their marriage was a tempestuous affair, a desperate attempt to find solace in another broken soul. They had 2 children, a daughter and a son, but Alice's mental health continued to deteriorate. Unable to cope with the demands of motherhood, she lost custody of her children. The pain of losing her children was a wound that never truly healed. She became a shell of her former self, a beautiful disaster adrift in a sea of despair. Charles, meanwhile, continued to tread the path of self-destruction. His drug addiction deepened, his life a constant struggle against poverty and despair. He lived a solitary existence, haunted by the ghosts of his past, his only solace found in the fleeting moments of connection he experienced with his music. Both Alice and Charles, despite their struggles, carried within them the remnants of their divine heritage, a spark of magic, a flicker of the extraordinary, hidden beneath the layers of trauma and despair. They were, in essence, broken gods, struggling to find their way back to themselves, to the beings they were meant to be.